In court, my mom called me a dangerous liar, until the judge closed the file and said, "Nobody told you?" The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my mother's bracelet tap against the wooden witness stand. She didn't hesitate. "Your Honor," she said, looking straight at the judge before turning just enough for every relative behind me to see her profile. "My daughter has lied for most of her life. She's manipulative, unstable, and she's dangerous when people trust her." A few people in the gallery nodded. My uncle folded his arms. My cousin looked away from me. My attorney leaned closer and whispered, "Don't interrupt. Let her finish." Every instinct told me to stand up and deny every word. Instead, I gripped the edge of the table until my fingers hurt. My mother took one slow breath, as though she had been waiting years to say the next sentence. "She's a pathological liar." Silence settled over the courtroom. The judge didn't answer. He simply closed the file in front of him. He looked at my mother for several long seconds, his expression unreadable. Then he asked one calm question. "Nobody told you?" "No." The color drained from my mother's face. Her attorney stopped writing. I had absolutely no idea what the judge meant. 3 weeks earlier, I thought the hardest part of losing my grandmother would be watching her funeral. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching my own mother turn my grief into a courtroom battle. My name is Mercy Carter. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a pediatric trauma nurse. Every day I help frightened children through the worst moments of their lives. I stay calm because panic doesn't save anyone. But there was one person I had never learned how to stay calm around. My mother. After my grandmother passed away, I expected disagreements over the estate. Families argued about those things all the time. I never imagined my mother would try to convince a judge that I couldn't be trusted with any part of Grandma's final wishes. The petition she filed didn't just challenge legal decisions, it challenged who I was. According to the documents, I was dishonest, emotionally unstable, manipulative, and incapable of acting in anyone's best interests. Reading those words felt like opening a file about a stranger. Except my own mother had signed every page. When the hearing began that morning, most of my relatives sat behind her instead of behind me. No one smiled. No one asked how I was holding up. They had already chosen which version of our family history they believed. My attorney quietly organized our documents while my mother chatted confidently with her lawyer, smiling as if the outcome had already been decided. Then she took the witness stand. She never looked nervous. She spoke with complete confidence, answering every question as though she'd rehearsed them for weeks. Each accusation sounded more certain than the last. Each one made me wonder how many times she'd told the same story before we ever entered that courtroom. Then came the sentence that froze everyone. "She's a pathological liar." The judge closed the file, looked directly at my mother, and asked, "Nobody told you?" 3 weeks before that hearing, my life followed the same routine every single day. I finished my shift at the children's hospital, drove across town, stopped at the pharmacy if Grandma needed prescriptions, and spent the evening at her house. She hated feeling dependent. "I can still make my own tea," she'd say every evening, reaching for the kettle before I gently moved it back onto the counter. "I know you can," I'd answer with a smile. "But I also know you'll pretend you don't need help until you burn yourself." She'd laugh. "You're too much like your grandfather." Those quiet evenings became the best part of my day. We organized her medications together. I wrote down every doctor's appointment. I balanced her checkbook when her arthritis made writing painful. Every receipt went into a folder. Every prescription was logged. One evening, she noticed me filing another stack of papers. "You keep everything," she said. "I work in trauma," I replied. "Documentation becomes a habit." Grandma looked at me for a long moment before lowering her voice. "Keep doing it." I frowned. "It's just paperwork." "No," she said softly. "Sometimes paperwork becomes memory, especially when people decide to rewrite it." I didn't understand what she meant. I wish I had. My mother rarely visited. When she did, she treated every visit like an inspection. She'd glance around the living room. "You rearranged the furniture." Grandma wanted the chair closer to the window. Mom looked at Grandma instead of me. "Did she?" Grandma answered immediately. "Yes." Mom smiled politely. Of course. But the moment Grandma left the room, her smile disappeared. You really enjoy making yourself look indispensable, don't you? I stared at her. I'm taking care of Grandma. No, she replied quietly. You're making sure everyone thinks you're taking care of her. I opened my mouth to argue. Then I stopped. Experience had taught me exactly what would happen next. If I defended myself, she'd accuse me of being defensive. If I explained, she'd call it manipulation. If I became frustrated, she'd say my emotions proved her point. There was no winning, only surviving until she left. Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 months later. The house felt unbearably empty. Before I could even process the loss, my mother took charge. I'll handle the funeral, she announced during the first family meeting. No one questioned her. She assigned relatives different responsibilities. Flowers, church arrangements, reception. Then she looked at me. You don't need to worry about any of this. I blinked. I'd like to help. We already have enough people. That was the end of the discussion. Over the next several days, I discovered family decisions had been made without me. Meeting times changed without anyone telling me. Important phone calls happened after I'd been deliberately left out of group messages. Every time I arrived somewhere, conversations stopped. I began hearing whispers instead. I heard Mercy tried to control everything. They say she pressured Grandma. Apparently there were problems for years. The stories were oddly specific. Too specific to be rumors. Someone had been planting them. And I knew exactly who. A week before the hearing, my attorney placed a thick folder on his conference table. I need you to prepare yourself. He slid the petition toward me. I read the first page. Then the second. By the third page, my hands had gone cold. She actually filed this? He nodded. She's challenging your credibility before the estate issues are even discussed. I kept reading. Manipulative. Compulsive liar. Emotionally dangerous. Unable to separate fact from fiction. Every accusation was written as though it were an established fact. There isn't any evidence, I whispered. There doesn't appear to be. So why say it? Because if the court believes you're unreliable, every document you've prepared becomes easier to question. I closed the folder. For a brief moment, I imagined calling every relative, showing them my calendars, the medication logs, the receipts, every record I'd kept for years. Instead, I took a slow breath. No. My attorney looked at me. I brought the truth. I rested my hand on the neatly organized binders beside my chair. The evidence can speak louder than I can. The morning of the hearing, I walked through courthouse security carrying those binders. Across the lobby, my mother entered surrounded by smiling relatives. She looked at me with complete confidence as we passed each other through the metal detectors. Without breaking stride, she leaned close enough that only I could hear. By tonight, no one will ever believe another word you say. The hearing began less than 10 minutes later. Everyone stood as the judge entered, then settled into silence. My attorney gave a brief opening statement, explaining that the hearing concerned the administration of my grandmother's estate and the petition my mother had filed seeking control over it. Then Diane Carter took the witness stand. She adjusted the microphone, folded her hands neatly, and smiled with the confidence of someone who believed every person in the room was already on her side. Her attorney began gently. Mrs. Carter, why did you file this petition? She sighed. Because this isn't about money. She glanced toward me. It's about protecting my mother's legacy. He nodded. And why do you believe your daughter shouldn't be involved? Her expression changed from concerned to deeply saddened. Because I've spent years trying to help Mercy. She's always created stories that never happened. She convinces people she's the victim. Eventually, everyone else gets hurt. Several relatives lowered their heads in agreement. I heard someone quietly whisper, "That's true." My stomach tightened. None of those people had spent the evenings with Grandma. None of them had seen the medication schedules taped inside the kitchen cabinet. None of them had watched her struggle to button her sweater because arthritis had twisted her fingers. But they had all heard my mother's version. For years. Her attorney continued, Has this been an ongoing pattern? Oh, yes. My mother nodded slowly. When Mercy was younger, she'd deny saying things she'd said 5 minutes earlier. Later, she'd accuse other people of lying instead. She paused dramatically. It only became worse as she got older. Every sentence was delivered with calm certainty. No shouting, no anger, just confidence. Confidence can sound remarkably convincing when people already want to believe you. Then her attorney produced a stack of sworn statements. We've submitted affidavits from family members. He handed copies to the judge and my attorney. These statements describe similar experiences involving Ms. Carter over many years. My attorney immediately stood. Objection, Your Honor. These statements repeat allegations without first-hand evidence supporting the claims. I understand, the judge replied evenly. I'll determine what weight, if any, they deserve. Proceed. My mother didn't even look at me. She looked at the judge, as though I weren't sitting 10 feet away. The questioning became more pointed. Mrs. Carter, her attorney asked, did your daughter ever attempt to influence your mother's decisions regarding her estate? Repeatedly. Can you explain? My mother folded her hands. She isolated my mother. I felt my attorney tense beside me. She controlled doctor's appointments. False. She handled the finances. With Grandma's permission, she made sure no one else knew what was happening. Completely untrue. Then came the accusation that rippled through the courtroom. I believe she manipulated my mother into changing estate documents. Several people gasped. Someone behind me whispered, I knew it. For the first time that morning, I couldn't stay silent. I stood. That isn't true. The room turned toward me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. Just 4 quiet words. That isn't true. Before my attorney could say anything, my mother slowly shook her head. There. She pointed toward me. That's exactly what she does. Her voice remained perfectly controlled. She simply denies reality whenever she's confronted. A few jurors weren't present, this wasn't that kind of hearing, but every spectator seemed to absorb her words as though they carried the weight of proof. My single denial had somehow become part of her evidence. I sat back down. For the first time all morning, doubt crept into my mind. Had staying silent been the wrong decision? Or had speaking just made things worse? The judge hadn't interrupted much during the testimony. But now he leaned forward. Mrs. Carter. Yes, Your Honor? I have a few questions. His tone changed. Not harsher. More precise. What year did these concerns first arise? She answered immediately. Oh, many years ago. Can you be specific? She named a year. He wrote something down. And was there litigation involving your family around that time? She hesitated. Only for a fraction of a second. Yes. What type of proceeding? A private family matter. I see. He asked another date. Then another. Then another. Then another. Each one reached farther into the past than seemed necessary for a probate hearing. My mother's answers remained confident. But something had shifted. She had stopped looking at the audience. She had stopped smiling. Instead, she watched the judge with growing uncertainty. Finally, he turned toward the courtroom clerk. I'll need the archived file from the earlier proceeding. The clerk looked surprised. That case, Your Honor? Yes. The complete file? The complete file? The courtroom fell silent. Even my attorney looked confused. My mother stared at the bench. For the first time that morning, she looked afraid. The judge adjusted the archived file so both attorneys could see it. There is no need, he said calmly, to speculate about credibility when this court has already addressed the issue. He looked directly at my mother. Several years ago, this court presided over a confidential family proceeding involving the same parties now before me. The courtroom remained silent. The matter required extensive testimony, independent evaluations, and documentary evidence. After reviewing that evidence, the court found a repeated pattern of knowingly false allegations made by Mrs. Diane Carter against members of her own family. No one moved. The findings were not directed at Mercy Carter. He paused just long enough for every word to settle. They were directed at Diane Carter. A quiet gasp escaped somewhere behind me. The judge continued. The record further reflects that Mrs. Carter's repeated fabrications significantly damaged her credibility. Those findings remain part of this court's record. For several seconds, my mother simply stared ahead. She didn't argue. She didn't object. She looked as though someone had taken the floor out from beneath her. Her attorney slowly stood. Your Honor. He swallowed. I was unaware of these prior findings. Had I known they existed, today's presentation would have been substantially different. I understand, the judge replied. He looked toward my mother. Mrs. Carter, you chose to repeat those same allegations under oath, despite an existing judicial record directly contradicting them. My mother's shoulders dropped. This isn't fair. It was the first time all morning her voice had sounded uncertain. The judge answered without raising his voice. The purpose of this court is fairness. No one spoke after that. The silence carried more weight than any argument. The judge turned toward my attorney. Mr. Lawson, your client submitted extensive documentation regarding her grandmother's care. Yes, Your Honor. The medication logs, financial records, appointment schedules, and caregiving records appear thorough and internally consistent. They are. They also align with testimony provided by neutral third parties. He closed the current probate file. The petition challenging Mercy Carter's credibility is denied. My mother closed her eyes. The request for control of the estate is dismissed. I felt my attorney lightly touch my arm. He didn't smile. He simply whispered, "You don't have to prove who you are anymore." For the first time since my grandmother died, I believed him. The judge wasn't finished. He looked once more toward my mother. Because testimony presented today may conflict with established court findings, I am referring the record for review regarding possible perjury. A murmur spread across the gallery. My mother's attorney slowly gathered his papers. He looked exhausted. "I'm sorry," he quietly said to the court. Then he turned to my mother. His disappointment was unmistakable. She couldn't meet his eyes. Outside the courtroom, no one rushed to speak. The same relatives who had avoided me that morning now stood awkwardly in the hallway. My aunt approached first. She hesitated. "I owe you an apology." I nodded. She continued, "We believed what we kept hearing." "So did everyone else," I answered. One by one, more relatives came forward. My uncle admitted he'd never questioned the stories. My cousin quietly confessed she'd stopped answering my calls because she'd assumed the accusations were true. None of them asked me to forget what had happened. None of them tried to excuse it. They simply admitted they had been wrong. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. The truth had spoken without my help. Over the following months, my grandmother's estate was settled exactly as she had intended. The records I'd carefully kept during those evenings at her kitchen table answered every legal question that arose. Nothing had been manipulated. Nothing had been hidden. Everything matched. The folders Grandma once told me to keep became the reason her wishes were honored. I often thought back to something she'd said while watching me organize receipts. Sometimes paperwork becomes memory, especially when people decide to rewrite it. Only now did I understand. She hadn't been talking about paperwork. She'd been talking about truth. I continued working as a pediatric trauma nurse. Children still arrived frightened. Parents still needed reassurance. Life moved forward. Family gatherings became quieter, not because everyone suddenly became close again, but because no one accepted gossip as fact anymore. As for my mother, we no longer argued. I stopped trying to win battles that never should have existed. I answered when necessary. I kept my boundaries, and I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. Silence is not surrender when you're protecting your peace. Sometimes the truth doesn't need you to shout. It only needs the right person to recognize it. Because the loudest accusation isn't destroyed by a better argument. It's destroyed the moment the truth finally opens the right file.